Good.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Roy S. Johnson of AL.com, and I am pleased to have the director of The Last Dance, my friend Jason Hehir, on today. Jason, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So this is a 2.5-year process, and you're just about hitting the finish line. How do you feel?
Tired, much like I would imagine when someone's about to summit Everest and they have about 7 or 8 steps left before they get to that peak. There's nostalgia there. There's a bit of this bittersweetness. There's happiness. There's sadness because this has become, a family of my team and I working on this thing for at least 2.5 years. Some of us longer than that. And given the circumstances that the world is under right now, it's just kind of surreal. So there's a whole cocktail of emotions.
So take us back to the beginning when you first heard that there was this treasure trove of footage that was sitting in a closet, I presume, somewhere in either New Jersey or New York with an X on it so that it was not aired. And then how did you become involved with the project?
I had heard about this footage, for years. It's been kind of urban legend in sports production circles. It was shot when I was a senior in college, so I had nothing to do with the genesis of it. But in 2016, the summer, so four years ago this July, I was approached by executive producer Mike Tolan, and he told me that the footage did indeed exist and that it was shot under the condition that Michael Jordan and the NBA would have to agree that it could be released, and on the conditions of that release. So all the I's have been dotted, the T's have been crossed in the agreement process, and now they were looking for a director, and he wanted to know if I was interested in directing a multi-part series based on that season, which he could barely get the question out of his mouth.
I was going to say, that must have been like a rhetorical question, even though you grew up in Boston.
That's the easiest question I've ever gotten in my career, if not my life. So, but it wasn't that simple because there's a vetting process, and I don't know who else they were talking to, but I would imagine there's a fair amount of directors, and it finally looked like the wheels were turning in the right direction, but they still, to get those entities like the NBA and the Jordan brand and ESPN and Netflix all on board, these are multi-billion-dollar entities, each one of them, who are used to having their own way. So to get them to the table and negotiate that deal, I was sitting on the sideline just waiting to be called into the game. But it wasn't getting around to starting. So I actually went off and did a documentary called Andre the Giant for HBO, and that took me about a year. And when I got done with that, they still hadn't signed the deal. So the timing kind of worked out. I took a few weeks off after Andre, and in January of 2018, we officially started work on The Last Dance.
So speaking of multi-billion-dollar entities that are used to getting their own way, Michael Jordan, do you feel as if he was completely honest with you throughout the 3 interviews that you did? And was there anything that you had to leave out based on his desire not to have it in the series?
As far as his honesty, you'd have to ask him, but I have no way of gauging whether or not he was telling the truth to me. I certainly feel like he was. And as far as him taking anything out, there was not a frame of anything in the entire process that Michael or his closest advisors and Jump 23 requested that we take out or demanded we take out. There was never any of that sort of policing. They had. I don't know what that contract says, because that's a few pay grades above me. Those contracts get negotiated. So I don't know what power he actually had and what the NBA had to overrule him, or Netflix or ESPN. But no one ever exercised any rights. They never had to. It never came to that, which is a blessing for me because I never had to get caught in the crossfire. I could tell the story I wanted to tell.
Walk us a little bit through the 3 interviews. What was the time span? Over what amount of time? How many months did they occur? And how long were they? And was there preparation beforehand? And of course, we want to know what was in that glass sitting on the table next to him.
That's a popular question. And if I knew the answer to that, I wouldn't be doing my job as the interviewer, because that was our first interview. So to answer your first question, the first interview was June of 2018, June 26th. I remember the day. And I didn't know what we were going to get from Michael. I had met him just a few times briefly before then. His team put me in front of him just to have a bit of a rapport, but really it wasn't like he came in and we were old friends. We were still basically strangers, and I didn't know if he was going to leave after a half hour, an hour, if he said, you know, this is all I want to do today. Really, we were under his it was his prerogative how that day was going to go. My goal was just to either get through 3/4 of my questions. I had probably 6 hours worth of questions that I had written down there, and to get through, I don't know, half, 3/4 of that. And to not have him be the one who said, all right, I'm done for the day, to be able to say, okay, we're done for now. Because I didn't want him to leave that day thinking, all right, I dreaded that, or I had to put a stop to that. I wanted to leave a good taste in his mouth and not a bad one. So we got through everything that I wanted to get through. We had 6 pages of questions, and normally it's about an hour per page. Michael is the Michael Jordan of interviews.
He's talkative, right?
He's talkative, but he's distinct, and he knows how to give a soundbite, and he knows how to express himself concisely. So he didn't ramble. There were answers that he was more passionate about than others, but we got through everything that I wanted to get through, which was really the first 3 or 4 episodes of the doc. I wanted to have enough material from him, who's obviously our main character. And then we had a bunch of satellite characters, of which you were one of the 105 other people that we interviewed. And when I say other people, I'm talking about Phil and Rodman and Pippen. These were big figures in this story. So I just wanted to be sure that we had enough material out of Michael to get through roughly the first half of the doc, because at that point we thought we were going to get him one more time.
Now we're coming off a couple of real emotional episodes. One talking about his father, James Jordan, and the death of his father and all that went into that. And those of us who were there at that time, for those of you out there who don't know, I covered the NBA throughout the 80s, the Bird Magic era, and of course the beginning of the Michael Jordan era. Followed the game as an editor through this Last Dance season and beyond. So I'm intimately familiar with that. Also talked about his relationship with his teammates and how difficult it was, what a difficult leader he was. There was a moment there, of course, I think it was at the end of episode 7, perhaps, when he started tearing up and said that was it. You and I have been in situations where we worked on another documentary where the subject starts to cry. Give us a sense of what it was like to be in that room when Michael Jordan got emotional talking about his father.
Well, most of the time, it wasn't the emotion about his dad. When he was really emotional at the end of episode 7, that was not about his father. That was in response to a question I asked him about whether it was worth the trade-off to be considered this fierce competitor and not automatically considered a nice guy. That I thought going into this process that's how most people considered Michael. It wasn't that he wasn't a nice guy, but that's not the first thing you think of when you think of Michael Jordan. You think win at all costs. You think the consummate winner and champion. And in my experience with him, he was a very nice guy and very certainly respectful to me and to the crew in the time that we spent with him. So I was curious as to whether or not he was ambivalent about having that reputation, if as a nice guy, it bothered him to not be considered as such. And what followed was a really long, passionate answer, defending the kind of teammate he was and the kind of mentality that you have to win the way that he won. And he's adamantly proud of the fact that when he came in '84, they couldn't fill up half of Chicago Stadium. They were getting less than 7,000 people per game. And by the time he left there, not only was Chicago Bulls a global phenomenon, you had additional teams in the NBA. Michael was making $33 million his final year. I don't know what the total payroll for the NBA was in 1984, but some of the numbers just grew exponentially under the leadership and the superstardom of Michael Jordan. And he was fiercely proud of the fact, or is fiercely proud of the fact, that comes from hard work, that all of these endorphins, as he said in episode 5, none of that happens out there without his game. He said if he averaged 2 points and 3 rebounds a game, there's no Gatorade, there's no Hanes, there's no Nike, there's no any of that. So he was fiercely protective and proud of the hard work that he put into that. And he wanted each of his teammates to have to go through a similar gauntlet that he went through. And he got passionate about it. The difference when you ask, of other projects where people have gotten emotional is most of the time, that those emotional moments are coming because you're asking about something that's traumatic. You're asking about a death or a really difficult moment in someone's life. And it's difficult enough to ask them to conjure that and to ask them to trust you with their candor and with their vulnerability. But with Michael, that emotion came out of nowhere. I was not expecting that emotion out of him. And it was only 45 minutes into our first interview. So we're still just like really kind of flicking the jab and getting to know one another and dipping our toe into the waters of this series. And boom, the next thing you know, he's getting emotional about that, which speaks volumes as to how true that feeling actually is. You asked if he was honest in these interviews. I mean, he's in the wrong business if he was not being honest when he choked up like that, because he should be an actor.
Sure.
Aside. So it was stunning, and it was really encouraging, because it meant that he was actually going to invest himself and his candor and his vulnerability that I just mentioned into this documentary. It would have been very easy for him to sidestep a lot of these questions, and very rarely, if ever, did he do that.
Some of the best footage is not just so much behind the scenes, but the practice footage, where you see that Michael Jordan plays as hard in practice, that he played as hard in practice as he did in games, and particularly during the filming of Space Jam, when the producers built a full court and a gym for him there, and he invited some of the best players in the league to come play games during that time. That was, of course, when he was coming back. He had just come back into the NBA, and I think part of those games were scouting games. He wanted to measure himself against players who were in shape and at their prime. And so those games, I think, were amazingly competitive. Is there any more footage of that? And when you watched that, what did you sense about him from watching that footage during that time?
There is more. It's limited. I believe that footage, our archival producer, Nina Kirstich, would know better than me. There was 10,000 hours of footage in our system. So that was one of the needles in a haystack of just game after game after game after shot of, every game of Phil Jackson's career, every game of Steve Kerr's career, every game of anyone's career, plus all the off-court B-roll and all that. So this was, a very small sliver of an overall pie. I think they shot that for like some Pat O'Brien like celebrity show, one of those kind of Entertainment Tonight kind of deals. And I think they shot just a quick feature about that. So that's why there was such a limited amount. It wasn't like the NBA had parked cameras there for the summer and was documenting this for posterity, although it would have been incredible because you could do a full documentary just about that summer. I read somewhere that Juwan Howard lived with Michael that summer. And when you see, like you said, the names that were coming through, you see Reggie Miller on there, Sean Bradley, of course, because he was in the movie. Olden Polynice was coming through. It's fun to kind of go through and try and test your
recognize players that you'd almost forgotten about.
Test your fandom. It's like, oh my God, there's Olden Polynice, or there's and then Rodman will walk by, and then you had guys like George Clooney was coming to play. He wasn't there for the cameras, but we tried to get in touch with him so I could ask him what it was like, because he was on the lot. They were shooting ER down the street on that same lot. So everybody, you had mega celebrities coming in to watch and or play, and then you had elite athletes coming, as you said. Michael didn't really acknowledge it, but I would be hard pressed to believe that there wasn't some sort of scouting going on, that he's not gauging guys' games and gauging his own game, because as we know, his game transformed from pre-baseball to post-baseball. He came a back to the basket player and just kind of it was like a martial artist. He was like the guru when he came back. When he was before baseball, he was that young, hungry, I was going to say out of control, but he was very much in control, but just like raw athleticism and raw hunger. He came back. It was almost like this, he was Yoda and not Luke Skywalker, to use another movie reference. He was just a master at that point. So I think it just shows that he's a gym rat. That's where he's the most comfortable. He could have quit and walked away and been on a beach for the rest of his life with the money that he had accumulated in the summer of 1995. But that's where he was the most comfortable, was back in a gym. And there were some NBA guys there, as we said, but there were some everyday guys too, guys from the crew, and the director of Space Jam hopped in a couple of games. He just loved being in that environment. He was playing in pickup games when he was with Terry Francona, when he was playing minor league ball.
Didn't matter who was on the other side. He still was going to try to take him out.
He loves basketball. He's got that famous love of the game clause in his contract, and it's not BS. It's for real.
Now, a lot of interest down here, of course, in Michael's tenure with the Birmingham Barons. You featured that in the last couple of episodes. And, towards the end, Terry Francona actually said he thought Michael Jordan would have made the majors had he stuck with it. Yeah. It sounds unbelievable to those of us who followed that and who saw it. Some have criticisms of that time. I think he should be given credit for trying. And he didn't do probably as badly as most people think. But to think he was going to make the majors, was that believable to you?
Very much so. And baseball is more my sport than certainly basketball. I have no right hand. You don't want to see me on a basketball court. You do if you're defending me. You just force me right, and I'll give the ball up. But I'm a baseball guy. Came from a baseball family, and so talking to Terry Francona as a Sox fan, first of all, was a thrill because he brought us our first title in a jillion years. But I do believe if Terry Francona and Mike Barnett, who are baseball lifers, say that Michael needed about 1,000 more at-bats and he would have gotten to the major leagues, I don't think people understand what it takes to hit 202 above the Mendoza line in Double-A baseball when you haven't picked up a bat and seen a live pitch since you were 15 or 16 years old. Michael
in your 30s. He was in his 30s.
He didn't play high school ball all the way through high school. He quit. So this is someone who dropped the game sophomore and junior year of high school and decided to pick it up at a professional level. And you could say it's minor leagues, all you want. That's Double-A baseball, and that's where prospects go to get noticed. And Michael, as Terry said, knocked in over 50 runs, and there's a lot of good prospects who didn't do that. So to hit over 200 is really impressive. I think he stole 31 or 32 bases. He flies on the base path, and we all know that is an unteachable skill. And then I think in the fall league, after that Barron stint, he went to Arizona and hit something like 268. So he was, I don't think by any means he was going to be an all-star. He wasn't going to be a great baseball player, but I don't think that that's what he was looking to do either. If not for that lockout or strike, I guess you would call it. Was it a lockout or a strike? Lockout. All right. The lockout was NBA. You're right. If not for that, I don't think we're having this conversation because I think that he would have been content to be a pro baseball player, and that would have been how he ended his professional athletic career.
Now, I know you need to run. I wanted to ask you about one person that you did not get to interview, and that's Jerry Krause. Krause died in 2017, but obviously he is a central figure in this documentary. The villain is how he's portrayed in most of the coverage of it. What sense of Krause did you have before this series, and how do you think people who watch the series should think of him?
The sense of Krause I had was a guy who desperately wanted credit and deserved it, but probably didn't deserve as much as he thought that he should be getting. It was somewhere in the middle. And I think that, everything I've heard from the people who knew Jerry well behind closed doors is complimentary. And so it disappoints me to hear people saying that he's cast as the villain in this. I mean, of course he was the linchpin. He was at the center of all this, and he's the one who said to Phil, you can go 82-0 and we're breaking up this team. And there are reasons behind that were far beyond the balance sheet of the Bulls franchise. It had to do with egos and credit and long-standing, long-simmering feuds between some really powerful people within the organization, Michael and Scotty included, in addition to Dennis and Jerry. So I really wish that we could have interviewed him. We tried to get him in this thing as much as possible through file footage early on. But it's undeniable that the only piece of that puzzle that was there when Jerry came in 1985 was Michael Jordan, who had arrived in 1984. But there's only one person who recognized the value of the triangle and the genius of Tex Winter. That's Jerry. There's only one person who recognized the potential of a guy named Phil Jackson, who got laughed out of other offices in the NBA and was this close to leaving basketball altogether. Jerry Krause is the one who recognized that. Jerry Krause is the one who made the gutsy trade for Bill Cartwright and traded away Michael's enforcer on the court and his best friend off of it, Charles Oakley. Jerry Krause is the one who recognized pieces, small pieces, like the Steve Kerrs and the John Paxsons. He's the one who went out and signed Dennis Rodman. So you could make a very good argument, of course, that Michael Jordan is the alpha and the omega of that Bulls dynasty. But you could make a good argument that without Jerry Krause, they're not winning 6 titles in 8 years. So I hope that people recognize that by the end of the series. You are going to see some people offering superlatives at the end of the series that are unlikely to do so, having watched the series so far. And I was happy that they offered those words. But I do think he doesn't get the credit that he deserves. He's just kind of, as Steve Kerr said, he just sometimes just couldn't get out of his own way.
Jason, I know you've got to run. Thank you for these few minutes. Thank you for allowing me to be in the series and for interviewing me. It was great to reminisce about that time. Do you have any little hints or any other previews for episodes 9 and 10 this Sunday?
You're going to see, a couple of the most challenging series that the Bulls faced in their entire dynasty run, which was that Eastern Conference Finals against Indiana, and then the second finals specifically against Utah. You're going to see the flu game. You're going to see a deep dive on Steve Kerr's backstory, which is one of the most fascinating stories. One of my favorite stories, meeting Steve Kerr's mom and Michael's mom were maybe the two most impressive people of the 106 people we interviewed. The iPad's going to make its appearance a couple more times. There's a lot coming up, so we're proud of these episodes, and these were edited and produced entirely during this pandemic. So my team is especially proud of these, and we're excited to show it to the world.
Well, Jason, thanks again. Clearly, during this very different and unique and historic time, a lot of people are tuning in. A lot of people are getting an insight into an era that many of them maybe just heard about. Thank you for your role in that, and allow me to participate. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
All right, man. Be safe.
All right. See you. Bye-bye.